Good morning, and welcome to First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church. It occurs to me that we won't be using those words very much longer to identify the name of our church, since we're now in the middle of our search for a new name. But my name is Mary Kerwin, and I'm serving as your co-celebrant in worship today. Our minister, Reverend Annie Furster, has the day off, and we invited Daniel Polk to come as our guest speaker. Thanks, Daniel, for accepting our invitation. A little bit about Daniel is that he is originally from Iowa, but has lived in Texas for a few decades and has learned the drawl, sort of. He's the executive director of our group, North Texas Unitarian Universalist Congregations, also known by its acronym NTUC. And in his spare time, Daniel enjoys wordplay and coloring wood for art projects. Daniel also tries to use his privilege for the benefit of society. On to a few announcements today. All religious education classes, both adult and children, begin next Sunday, March 20th at 9:45 a.m. And I think that's really exciting. We haven't done that for quite some time now. Yay! And especially for adults, we will be having a Social Justice Sunday, and we'll have a guest speaker, Bertinard Gardner from LGBTQ Saves. They will share with us about how trans lives are impacted by the recent developments here in Texas and what we can do to help. Also next weekend, on Saturday morning, March 19th, from 9 a.m. to noon, the board has scheduled an all-church workday cleanup, where the focus will be on finishing the work in Jagger's parlor. Now, I just want to point out to you that all-church cleanup doesn't mean that we're cleaning the whole building. It means that we need to have an all-church people response to come to the workday on Saturday. So please, come one, come all, and lend a helping hand. We typically have a musical prelude at this time in the service. However, our pianist, Misha Bereshnev, also has the day off. Misha performed as a guest soloist with the Corpus Christi Symphony Orchestra last evening and is still in South Texas today. Filling in for Misha is our very talented Michael Nguyen, who is accomplished on the piano as well as our choral director. Thank you, Michael, for being with us today. And I now ask you to take a moment to center yourselves as we begin our worship together. Oh, no. First, we'll have a call to worship.
I was expecting prelude in here.
Oh.
Okay. It says prelude. This call to worship is by an unknown author. I saw it somewhere and thought it was lovely. Come down off the ladder, wash out that paintbrush, shake the sand out of your shoes, get up off your muddy knees and give the garden a morning off. Fold up the newspaper, turn off the coffee pot, close up your calendar, already filled with dates and times and people and places that claim you. This church is ready for you to fill its rooms, to create its spirit, to generate its warmth, to kindle its lights. This church is ready for you to make community, to build beauty, to bend it towards justice, to serve its ideals. This church is ready for you to be here, honoring our past, invigorating our present, and dreaming our future. This is your church. Here we are home. Here we are whole. Let us begin.
I now invite you to rise in body or spirit for the lighting of our chalice. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Please remain standing in and join us in singing our opening hymn, number 347, Gather the Spirit. The words are found in the gray hymnal or here on the screens.
Gather the Spirit.
Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another.
The question for today is about us and who we are. The history of Unitarian Universalism is filled with activism. We have long been on the forefront of civil rights and integration, working for justice for all people. So why is it historical that we are one of the widest denominations in the country and still to this day are that so way? The story for all ages will be delivered by Joe Burnham.
Well, good morning. Usually we have the kids all sitting down there, but today our little people are not here. So, Lavinia, do you want to come up here and join me? We have one small person. And she's as big as I am, so yeah, it sucks. Okay, so we have 7 basic principles that our kids know them as the 7 promises. Our story this morning is about breaking and keeping promises. Let's talk about breaking promises. If you will share your candy with me, I promise that when I get some, I'll share it with you. Okay. Have your friends ever disappointed you by not doing something they had told you they would do? Remember when you promised that you would share your candy with me? I don't remember promising that. Have grown-ups ever disappointed you by not doing something they told you that they would? Did you bring me a surprise like you promised? I'm sorry, son, but I forgot to bring you the surprise I promised you. When people do not do what they say, it's called breaking a promise. When someone breaks a promise, how does it make you feel? What do you think? What do you do? When someone breaks a promise, you may feel disappointed, frustrated, and angry. You may think that the person cannot be trusted. You may not believe the person the next time he or she makes a promise to you. I promise that I'll bring you a surprise next time I go on a trip. I bet he won't remember. It's important to treat other people the way you want to be treated. If you want other people to keep their promises, then you need to keep your promises. If you keep your promises, people will be able to trust you. Randy, did you pick up your toys as you promised? I knew I could trust you to keep your promise. He picked up all his toys. When people trust you, they can depend on you, and they know that you will not let them down. They know that you will be honest and will not lie. It's important to have people trust you. If people trust you, they will believe in you. They will not doubt or question you. They will respect you. They will allow you to do more. May I go next door if I come back in 1 hour? Yes, said Mother. If you want people to trust you, you must show them that you can be trusted. If Randy says that he'll be back in 1 hour, I know he will be back. He has shown me over and over and over again that he can be trusted. To show a person that you can be trusted, be where you say you will be, when you say you will be there. I'm home, right on time. To show a person that you can be trusted, do what you say you will do. Randy can be trusted. He does what he says he will do. To show a person that you can be trusted, give what you say you will give. Here's half my candy bar. I told my mom that I would share it with you. If you want to be trusted, you will need to keep your promises. Did you bring that quarter I lent you yesterday? I sure did. Here it is. If you want people to be happy, you will treat other people the way you want to be treated. This means that you will keep your promises because you want other people to keep theirs. And that means we live our 7 basic principles. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe and Lavinia and Roy. We'll refrain from singing the children out today. Our offertory. We know that our financial contributions to this congregation come from sacrifice and hard work. We are so grateful for this and commit together to ensure the funds we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves and our world than they could have done alone. May there be an offering to sustain and grow the life and the mission of this congregation. May we give in love and in hope. As is our custom, we share the undesignated cash offerings of our plate. Our Share the Plate recipient this quarter is the First Jefferson Playground Renovation Fund. And if the ushers will come forward, this morning's offering will be gratefully received.
We have a slight change in the order of service. We won't be singing our second hymn until after first response. We'll start off with the reading from the Selma Awakening by Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed, a prolific writer. His book, The Selma Awakening. This is from the introduction. For Unitarian Universalist, whose most progressive elements have long been champions of freedom in the broadest sense, Selma was a test. Did freedom merely mean freedom of belief and response and conscience? Or did it also include the civic, economic, and political reforms that the educated, middle-class, liberal religious constituency took for granted? Was this not a struggle for the nation's soul? Did commitment mean passing yet another earnest resolution, or did it mean including putting one's life at risk? And what of the UUs who answered Dr. King's call? Unitarian Universalists responded, but why they did remains to be analyzed. What was Selma's impact on Unitarian Universalism? In a decade when voting rights have emerged on the U.S. agenda and immigration has become our most national human rights issue, we need to answer these questions and draw lessons from the experience. And my response is that, yes, we have been long on the front edge of social issues. Or have we? Our track record is certainly mixed. In 1965, when the Selma March was starting, 5 decades of self-examination and reinvention that continues today. Not just about race. That process opened the doors for women and LGBTQ folks In 65, there were 14 women in fellowship. We had 14 women, and that includes the retired ministers. But nobody thought that number low. By the end of the century, though, half of our ministers were female, more than half of them. We could also say that we've caught up with the United Church of Christ. They were the first to ordain an openly gay minister and to call for same-sex marriage, but we were still at the forefront of the marriage movement. If I'm asked how the UUA is supportive, I just say that one of the very first legal weddings in this country was in not one of our churches, but at our headquarters with our president officiating. You can't get more official than welcoming than that. But I should not stray from the racial questions and our history. We like to highlight the good work we've done, but today I need to put a light on what is usually ignored. Over the past century or two, Unitarian Universalists have passed resolution one after another, calling for justice, opposing slavery, encouraging integration and equality, and so on. But our actions have been less than stellar, and our institutional response is sometimes as racist as the Jim Crow South, classist and sexist to boot. Our actions have not matched our words, our stated values. We have promoted assimilation and called it integration with all deliberate speed. I'll draw heavily, of course, from Morrison Reed's book, The Selma Awakening. So how were we exclusionary? First of all, ministers of color were actively discouraged by Unitarians. Egbert Ethelred Brown came to Meadville Seminary back in 1910, despite nobody answering his letters, and he was tolerated as long as he went back to Jamaica after ordination. Move along. But he came back and he started a congregation in Harlem in 1920. UUA President Cornish and others spent most of a decade trying to revoke his credentials. He was reinstated with help, and I quote from a memo circulated at headquarters, 25 Beacon Street, with the help of a Jewish lawyer you might be expected to find in the ACLU. In the late 1920s, Harry Richardson and Louis McGee were dissuaded from even seeking fellowship. In the 1930s, William Carter, who had founded the Church of the Unitarian Brotherhood in Cincinnati, was ignored and given no denominational support. In 1945, Alvin Cannon was denied fellowship because he would have had difficulty finding a pulpit. In 1961, Louis McGee was finally called as senior minister by our fellowship in Chico, California, some 30 years after hearing the call of ministry. He had never given up on our faith. African American ministers can be counted on two hands. We don't need more than two hands, not just at any one point in time, but the entire first half of the 20th century. And it wasn't just the pulpits. People of color were no more present on boards and commissions and UUA field staff. Before 1963, in denominational positions, there were three: Harold Collymore, Howard Thurman, and Marcella McGee. Three people, so I only need one hand. Neither were they present in our music and our books. There were no spirituals or gospels in our hymnals or music written by people of color. Our 1993 hymnal made some changes, including eliminating references to dark as a negative, among other changes. People of color also had little presence in our religious education materials, subject matter, or characters in the illustrations. How about our publishing house, Beacon Press? In the first decade of the 20th century, 3 books were published promoting eugenics. Can we be proud of that? No, not really. Universalists were sometimes more open. They ordained Joseph Jordan in 1889, and they funded his mission schools in Norfolk and Suffolk, Virginia. However, the editor of the Unitarian Universalist magazine for 22 years was stridently racist and never called out about it. He wasn't the first. Some state conventions had been ambivalent on slavery, while others fully supportive. This, from a proud liberal congregation. No wonder our membership was so predominantly white. Let's sing number 113, Where is Our Holy Church, as we contemplate those questions. In 1953, a survey asked how many Unitarian congregations had 5 or more Negroes attending. The answer was 13, so I only need to take off one shoe to count. It won't surprise anyone that most were in the large northern cities where the culture is generally more progressive. And institutions say a great deal about its values, so where do we build churches? This is an important part of our history. We built a lot of congregations in the 50s and 60s in suburbs of large metro areas, away from black neighborhoods, and near cultural centers, mainly universities. This usually meant that a person had to live near or have access to a car to come to church. In New England, where many towns were 90% white, including Waltham, Massachusetts, where just one of the towns that prohibited black workers at the mill. There were also communities segregated by custom or law, including sundown towns in the Midwest and Northwest, where people of color had to be gone by midnight, by day's end, by dark. Northwest wasn't any better than the South, really. Did you know blacks were forbidden by law to live in Oregon? It was a white state. And our local congregation is mentioned in the 2008 paper commissioned by the UUA. I quote, "In locating the pathway startup within the DFW area, metro area, did we factor in racial patterns appropriately and adequately? The 2000 census shows the metro area is 54% white, 24% Latino, and 60% black, while the 760 metro zip code area is 75% white, and the 76092 zip code, where the congregation was located, is 92% white. Do we follow patterns that make it unnecessarily difficult for congregations to be naturally multiracial and multicultural?" clothing also speaks volumes. And this has been another point of conflict. Have you ever thought about that? Many people who work all week in the corporate world in the corporate overalls, suit and tie for the men, look forward to the comfort of jeans and a pullover or t-shirt and shorts on warm summer days, while laborers and those who wear uniforms every day often look forward to cleaning up and putting on their Sunday best, only to walk in the sanctuary and feel overdressed. This not only in fellowships, but it was encountered at All Souls Church in Tulsa just this century. Growth in those fellowships in the 50s and 60s may have saved us, because we were quite rapidly shrinking, but they do not offer a sustainable model for our future. Let me say that again. The fellowship model does not offer us a sustainable model for growth. Author and Professor Holly Obrick has identified 4 barriers they presented to people of color and still do. Worship style, cerebral, and for some lacking spirit. The 1954 Commission on Intergroup Relations reported, "To many Negroes, the highly emotional content of worship services is objectionable and often embarrassing." Really? Anti-growth stance. So often we hear, "Oh, let's stay small. We don't want to evangelize." Yeah, right. Unitarians have often kept their congregations hidden, reserving them for those people who are smart enough and dedicated enough to find us, while the Universalists rarely built the institutions that would endure to be found decades later. Our fellowships also had an anti-clergy stance, distrustful of hierarchy and establishment, contrasted with African American communities where ministers and deacons were admired as the pillars and leaders of the community. And when a minister did want to convert to UUism, he would have found himself with parishioners who were often contentious or contrary to being led. And this is the term of flat earth humanism, fundamentalist humanism. Many of those congregations became firmly humanist, what we call atheist maybe, hostile to Christianity. While African American youths are more likely to identify as Christian, 28% versus 20% overall. These are all reflected in our values. In surveys in 1967 and 89, 74% of UUs ranked intellectual stimulation as the most important aspect of worship, while a similar number of African American UUs claimed celebrating common values, followed by hope, fellowship, and music. For them, intellectual stimulation came in at 47%. Like much else, this changed in the 1960s and at Selma. Nearly 200 of our ministers answered Dr. King's call to come to Alabama, and one, along with a layperson, died. Viola Liuzzo, Detroit mother of 5 children, was shot as she drove people home from the march. And James Reeb was clubbed with a baseball bat after he had dinner at a black restaurant. His death helped pass the Voting Rights Act. But we have to ask why we never hear of Jimmy Lee Jackson, whose murder started the march itself, and why LBJ didn't call his family like he did the Reebs. The Selma March was a turning point, a sea change, if you will. For the first time, UUs had put themselves on the line and risked all in the names of racial justice. Reverends Clark Olson and Olaf Miller survived the attack. They and others were uneasy until they could get to the safety of the airport for the trip back home. Many of them did not just have their belief in integration confirmed, but were themselves radicalized.
I'd like to ask Paul, I believe, if you might step out into the foyer for the book of Memory and Hope.
It's right up here.
Okay. Thank you. At this time, we turn our minds and hearts to the joys and celebrations amongst us, as well as all those who need our love and support at a time of sadness, illness, or loss. As you are so moved, we invite you to light a candle now or at any time during the service in our meditation center here to the side of the chancel. At our church, we covenant to share our happiness and our burdens. And in doing so, it is our intention to be authentically present to one another. In our book of Memory and Hope this morning, we have been asked to announce that the Shotmans are proud to announce their great niece, Rachel Rubens, has been accepted to Cambridge University, where she will pursue her studies in international law, and when she will at last learn what good beer tastes like instead of drinking this American schlep. Congratulations to the Shotman family and to Rachel. And let us also include in our circle of concern those beyond our immediate community. Today, especially the people of Ukraine who are caught up in the devastating war, and the people of Russia who are caught up in an equally economic war. May the leaders of all nations with the ability to influence this terrible situation find the courage and the wisdom to help bring an end to the violence and negotiate a peaceful settlement. May it be so. We now ask you to settle comfortably and pause for a few moments of quiet meditation to hold and uplift the sorrows and celebrations, both spoken and unspoken, among us.
The path to diversity is rarely smooth and often with broken promises. In the late 1960s, we had the empowerment controversy, a part of our history we don't really talk about. Many who'd been to Selma pushed for us to make up for lost time and to aggressively work for justice. But the group Black and White Action had a more modest, go slow approach, while the Black UU Caucus pushed for full funding of the Black Affairs Council with $250,000 annually at a time when the UUA was nearly broke. Yes, 1970, we were teetering on bankruptcy. Did you know that? It came to a head at the General Assembly in 1969 when a large group of delegates walked out of the General Assembly, out of the plenary session, led by the host minister. One who left was the Reverend Bill Singford, who went on to become our president later. He wrote, "The period itself was emotionally loaded, and like many other Unitarian Universalist people of color, I lost my church in the aftermath. Many whites perceived us as leaving in anger. The reality is that we left brokenhearted. That time has not only had ramification for our address of racism, silences and telling of partial truths, which were perhaps inevitable if not intentional, have clogged our spiritual and relational arteries. So how do we go about becoming the people we want to be? There are bright spots. Many of us, many congregations have walked the walk. Today, yellow SSL, Standing on the Side of Love, or we call it now Side with Love shirts, abound, and you can now get black ones with yellow hearts. They're in the photos and rallies, and many congregations have put up Black Lives Matter banners, like y'all have done. And more than a few have been vandalized. Reno, Nevada, 13 banners have been vandalized and replaced. Volunteers now show up every night to put it away and come back in the morning to hang it back up. Similarly, Live Oak Church in Austin, after having their 5th rainbow flag burned, covered the building with them. But discussions at GA, General Assembly, like the 2015 debate on Black Lives Matter, action of immediate witness, show that tension is still present and struggles to stay in relationship. Just one instance of our having to be careful about how we are together. Then President of the UUA, Peter Morales, asked, "Why are issues of gender and sexuality so much easier for us than issues of race?" The stark fact remains that we are far more comfortable with issues of sexuality than with issues of race. Why? Our future is promising, though it won't be easy living up to our hopes, being the people we claim to be. But there are tools, actions, and possible partners. So we can do things like investigate groups, allies for racial equality, explore the journey towards wholeness and creating beloved community programs, and teach building the world we dream about. If you want to know more, go to UUA and search for Tapestry of Faith, and you can download lots of adult programming. Explore neighborhoods, options in your neighborhood, in the community, but in helping and doing things with people, not for them. You ask, what are the big issues here? Healthcare, housing, hunger. Join and support groups like Black Lives of UUs. Join groups like NAACP, individually and as a congregation. Partner with other churches and with schools. But here, a note of caution. Do not do this without consensus. Don't just make a big significant step with a majority vote, but as a unified body. We don't want just a few people doing this work while others may or may not be supportive. Remember, an open door by itself is not enough to bring in the stranger. That door must be visible and easily found. There must be an invitation to come in. And we have to ask ourselves and others if newcomers will feel welcome, which can be a learning process all by itself. I saw a meme the other day. We can have diversity by inviting people to the party, but inclusion means asking them to dance. Diversity, well, the plantation was diverse also. Was it just? Not really. When we have done this, we can start to say that we are the people we say we are, and we can work on becoming the people we want to become. So what about this congregation? Who are you, and what do you stand for? Do your visitors have the same or similar answers? Let us move forward together. As we sing together hymn number 121, We'll Build a Land.
Captive
as we get ready to extinguish the chalice, I ask you, if here you have found freedom, take it with you into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may become true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And our benediction is by the Reverend Cynthia Landrum. We leave this gathered community, but we don't leave our connection, our concerns, our care for each other. Our service to each other, to the world, and to our faith continues. Until we are together again, friends, be strong, be well, be true, be loving. And as is our custom, we now invite you to join us for coffee and conversation in the library.